to the Grimm Chronicles. I am the Grimm reader, and this is going to be the third Grimm Chronicles of the year 2022. And so over the past week, what have I been reading? So the book that I finished was Fathers and Sons by Turgrnev, a short novel, which is why I was able to finish it, despite school starting and everything. And solid 4-star read, but also very clearly not 5 stars for me. It was good, but a little bit lacking. I think the writing is competent, but not sort of memorable in the way, I mean, I've only read the big Russians, you know, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. I think that's all. Well, maybe I read some Gogol, some of the short stories. And so, you know, it's hard to live up to those two. And the story was sort of, I mean, it is basically what it says. It's about the relationship of fathers and sons. One son is sort of more prominently featured than the other. And I guess what's interesting about the book is the class stuff, the class relationships, which we see quite clearly. And, you know, knowing not that much about Russian history, there's always the sort of the issue of the serfs, and I guess I don't know when. So this was published 1860. Oh, I forgot when this. 1862, I think. And I don't know when the serfs were liberated. I think maybe a little bit later. I'm not quite sure if I remember that when the serfs were freed. Maybe earlier. See, I don't really know. Anyway, and so it's interesting to see the class and how, like, the upper class Russians seem to be they travel a lot, they speak French, they, you know, live in other places. They're very sort of cosmopolitan, is what I want to say. Unlike the not so upper class Russians, who were much more sort of, you know, of the earth, so to speak, in a cliche way. And so some of that stuff is interesting. So it is sort of a society novel in that sense, but it was just sort of lacking in the sort of psychological depth or beauty of the prose of the other two that I'm talking about. And so, yeah, I'm glad I read it, but I'm not that interested in reading more Turgenev. Maybe, I don't know, tell me if there's something else I need to read. I do want to read other Russians. I want to go back to Gogol. I have a Pushkin NYRB book that is basically a historical novel of the Peasants' War, apparently, The Captain's Daughter, which I'm looking forward to reading at some point. But of course, I'm sort of thinking, well, since I loved Anna Karenina so much, and I do remember really loving War and Peace, I do kind of want to read more Tolstoy, and so I just picked these two up from my bookshelves. I have read some of them, but I don't remember exactly what I read. So I want to reread The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which I've heard very good things about. I just want to read more Tolstoy, and so this one too, the Kreutzer Sonata and other stories, and sort of maybe do a bit of see how they all fit into the timeline of his life, you know, early, late, whatever. But he's very good, so I want to read more Tolstoy. And then the big novel is going along slowly. Miss Macintosh is. Right now, I'm sort of stuck a little bit. I mean, I read, but, you know, a few pages here and there, to be honest. And I'm stuck in this long passage where she's entered into the consciousness of a young woman on the bus, the young woman who's pregnant, who's sort of disgruntled and sad and melancholy about her life and her life choices and about men. And it's all beautiful, but it's sort of slow moving. And I had one little passage here that I might share with you just to give you another sort of little snippet of the prose, if you don't mind. So this is the young woman's thoughts, and see, what's interesting about it is that the young woman's thoughts, of course it's Marguerite Young writing them, but you also kind of get the sense that it's perhaps the narrator, female narrator, the Cartwheel, the daughter of the opium lady, that she's sort of guessing that these are her thoughts too. It's not always clear whose thoughts these are. But this is just one, I think it's 2 sentences. It's just a pretty short paragraph. Let me read it to you. And I'm not saying I completely understand what's going on, but it's beautiful prose. So here it says, there were always, it seemed, 2 conflicting motives in her mind. and she was always confused by these considerations which should have worked for harmony, for the union of souls. She was divided, becoming someone else, and so she tried to hold on to her memory, hard as she could, and though she was an evanescence like smoke fading in the wind. How could she have known, until now, when it was too late, all her thoughts, all her loves, all her vague, unformed desires? Did she know them now? How could she have known her life, its beginning and end, what her life was still to be, what it might become? For there had always been another person, like a veil, through which one saw the burning star. So it's just a tiny bit of this long passage, or I mean, it's not that long, but it seems long. It's been going on for the good part of this chapter, and it's still going to go on for a good 20 pages, I think, until we get to the next chapter. So yeah, it's really going to be a long haul, but I'm still committed to it. I still love it. I love it dearly. It's just going to be with me for a very long time. So that's that. And then, so I've started teaching fairy tales. I'm reading a book on folklore, but it's not very good. And so I'm not really going to talk much about it. I mean, this is, yeah, it's okay. I'm just sort of dipping into this book, so I'm not going to talk about that one. But I am going to show you the book from which I get my first reading for the kiddies, I mean the students. So they read the first 30 pages of this book, which I assigned to them when a dream comes true. This is one of the most preeminent fairy tale scholars in America, Jack Zipes. And we read the first 30 pages, and then we don't read the rest of it. Actually, the next chapter we kind of do read, because it's a very similar chapter that's in a different book by him about the Brothers Grimm. It's about the Brothers Grimm, and it even has the same. Yeah, no, it's exactly the same as this other book by him. You know, he recycles chapters from his work. But then we don't go on to read about Hans Christian Andersen or Victorian England, which actually does sound kind of interesting. I should read this one day. I will. But the first 30 pages are really nice because they're kind of like a fairy tale, a history of the fairy tale, you know, as a genre. And he talks a little bit in generalities, and then he goes into his pick for first fairy tale is Cupid and Psyche from The Golden Ass. And then he moves on quickly into Italy and France and Germany and all that good stuff. It's sort of a really good, like, I call it an anchoring text for the class that we can refer to in terms of touching on a lot of the topics that we will talk about in the class. And he also kind of mentions, you know, there's different approaches to fairy tale studies. And one of them is Vladimir Prop, the sort of structuralist Russian approach to, he wrote a book called The Morphology of the Folktale, and I'm just not a fan of the very, very stripping away any kind of considerations to do with history or I guess not. I mean, Prop was sort of stripping away and honing in on the certain elements of each fairy tale and trying to kind of do a scientific analysis of them, which is, in my opinion, not very fruitful and kind of silly, to be honest. And so, but he does talk about it. So they get to know a little bit about that, and then we move on to more sort of, you know, different types of approaches to the fairy tales. Anyway, so that's just a little bit about what we do in the class. And then for my own reading, so I have started to read, and it's really interesting, On Being Blue by William Gass, my first Gass, a sort of long essay about blue, the color blue. But it's also about sort of language in general. And he is talking a lot about the fact that blue is used for blue stuff, like movies, etc., if you catch my drift. And he's actually really quite good about that, the fact that that realm of life is hard to capture it's, you know, in a sort of poetic way, how language seems to sort of be itself kind of shy or prudish or whatever when it comes to the words it has to talk about that realm of life, the blue realm, so to speak. And he's not wrong. It is kind of interesting how And he also sort of has this thing, he just wrote something about, okay, I will just read out the sentence. I should like to suggest that, at least on the face of it, a stroke-by-stroke story of copulation is exactly as absurd as a chew-by-chew account of the consumption of a chicken's wing. So, you know, that kind of where language falls short of experience of a certain kind, I guess. But I guess he's also going to talk about other blue stuff, like, for example, feeling blue. I mean, I think it's called, well, it's I'm being blue as opposed to I'm feeling blue. But he's going to talk about other stuff. And then I'm just at this point where I did find another nice sentence that I actually do like, because he is a very good writer. He's a very good writer. He's very good with language. And he writes here, there are a number of difficulties with dirty words. The first of which is that there aren't nearly enough of them. The second is that the people who use them are generally numbskulls and prudes. The third is that in general, they're not at all sexy. And the main reason for this is that no one loves them enough, which no one loves the words enough. So this idea of our attitude towards language and words is kind of interesting. You gotta love the words. I haven't quite figured out what he's doing with all of this. He's obviously a lover of language, and he's sort of interested in experience of a certain kind. And he does talk about other languages a little bit. I'm seeing here that's the introduction. That's not him. Because I am missing, he's talked about Scottish words a little bit, but he is sort of very much in the realm of the English language, and he doesn't seem to even distinguish much between American and British. Actually, there's this poem that he's just quoted, and that's from what's called the Australian poem, but it's written by Robert Graves, about the First World War. But he's definitely coming from a sort of English language standpoint, which why wouldn't he? That's where he is from. So yeah, it's very interesting, and I am interested in reading other fictional works by him too. But this is another I picked up because it's short, and I had a hard time choosing what I wanted to read next, because I did kind of want something to fall into, but with work and everything, I wasn't sure. So that's what I chose. I just wanted to show you a few other things that are going on. So I'm still continuing with this one. It's still going well. I just listen to it, and then I sort of pick up the pace. So one thing that he's doing that's really interesting in this fantasy novel is kind of reconfiguring how time and space work. So, for example, in a very broad way, not everyone, but death is not nearly as final as it is in our world. So a lot of times, death just means going to a different place where you're still kind of conscious, and it is a different place. It's a different realm. It's a different sort of dimension, but you still, nevertheless, you're still kind of alive in a certain sense. And there's a spectrum of how dead people really are, and whether they come back and who comes back, and just kind of playing around with that dimension of existence, making it less final, which also kind of makes it more interesting. And the same thing with space, because of these sort of places that certain entities in this world can go to, the warrens, that are kind of, I don't know how to describe them, but they're places that are in a different dimension, so to speak, and also and you can traverse, you can use them as a way to travel quickly, to different places. I have to pay more attention to it in terms of time travel. Do people, because it's usually more, they do sort of seem to stay in the present, but they enter into these spaces that are of the past, so to speak. And a character will say, how old is this place that I am in? I am of a different time, but I'm in this place that is of a different time. But they get to visit these different places. So, pretty abstract stuff, but also kind of cool and interesting. And I still can't give you a very clear sense of, it's really about all these factions coming together to have a big fight, but it's also about the characters and the interactions of the characters, and then this interesting sort of take on time and space. So there's that. today in the mail I got the second volume of the Stagdale comic, this cute little beautifully designed story of, so this is a young girl in, I guess, the 70s, 75, and she finds at the end this book, and it turns out to be a diary of a German person, but the person's written in English, and it's from 1938. And so this one, it's interesting how the covers are different. This has a smooth cover, but this is kind of a rougher cover. This one will take up the story from the 1938, and they'll have you know, Nazi German stuff in there, and I guess we'll see how the person came to be in England and put their diary in where she could find it. So that's kind of nice, and you get a little, you know, badge with it, and also the music. You listen to the music, which is really nice. So that's a fun little mini read, and I think I'm almost at the end. I mean, oh yeah, this is the last thing I'll show you guys. These are books are sort of to do with fairy tales. I'm going to kind of dip back into my German biography of the Grimm brothers, which is sort of, you know, it's going to take, I don't think I'll be able to read the whole thing, but I'm sort of dipping into it just because I'm teaching fairy tales. And I was just reading a little bit about how Jakob Grimm described in great detail, and also kind of in a very sort of mundane or sort of detailed but mundane ways, nothing to do with fairy tales, his upbringing in his biography, and how much his mother was involved in their upbringing, and kind of this comparing how the way they were raised was in line with the pedagogical sort of treaties of the time and what people were saying they should do. You know, there was a lot of talk about how children should be raised, and a lot of it was sort of negative or, you know, fear-based, which there's a little bit of that here too, but it's more in terms of, it's not really that negative. Anyway, it's a little bit general what I'm saying here, but it's very interesting, and he sort of qualifies a little bit that they were raised in a very religious household, but yet their religiosity was more to do with, you know, being a good person in life, kind of doing a lot in your actual living and not thinking too much about the post time, kind of a Protestant standpoint. They were Reformed Calvinists, so, you know, coming from that tradition, and also other people that were important to his upbringing. So yeah, that's going on too. There's lots going on, and a lot will be going on, and I'm hopefully we'll be finished with this one pretty soon, and I will keep going with this one, and I will probably pick up something else. I'm not sure what. I mean, I might just read this Stagdale part 2, or, you know, we'll see, something else. That's about it for me. Hope everyone's doing well. Tell me what you're reading, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.